Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, wrapped in all kinds of layers of turbulence, climatic, geopolitical, biological, social. There's information tsunami. And in the United States, this part of the planet, we have a particularly insane situation right now. I can't tell you how many friends I talk to who feel some combination of paralysis, confusion, anger, fear, all those five layers of death and dying stuff. And this is Andy Revkin, and this is a pop-up version of my Sustain What conversation series with Randy Olson, who is someone I migrate to when I'm facing communication confusion and other situations, because Randy, he started out as a marine biologist and then went into filmmaking, and now he's mostly consulting and coaching around how to communicate effectively your whatever your passion project or your goal or your problem is. And the problem right now for many people in and outside of government, in and outside of sustainability, is Trump and Musk have kind of taken the microphone, every microphone, and flooded the zone with a continual barrage of actions against agencies. And there's plenty to talk about related to agency reform. You know, USAID, you pick your target, there's always something to work on. But this approach is freaking out people. It's dangerous in terms of shutting down programs that are literally will determine someone's life or death in Sudan in the coming days. Well, because staff have been pulled out. And Randy, I just want to get into this a little bit with you because you have a good way of distilling both the challenge and the opportunities. Although this particular scenario seems quite something. And I wanted to start. We're going to get into your books and so much more, but I wanted to start by playing for you something Ezra Klein did the other day on his show. He migrates back to 2019, and the introduction is just, it says it all. Hopefully the audio will work here.
Weeks of the second Trump administration. Go back and listen to what Steve Bannon told PBS's Frontline in 2019.
The opposition party is the media. And the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with three things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover. But we got to start with muzzle velocity. So it's got to start, it's got to hammer, it's got to muzzle velocity.
Muzzle velocity.
So there you go. Flood the zone. Sorry, let me shut up, Ezra. So, you know, this is 2019. And the difference between 2019 and now is that 2019, they were flooding the zone with rhetoric, meaning, and now it's policy, it's executive orders and the like. So just take me on where you're at. Where's your gut right now? And then we're going to get into your methodologies and how people can think about communication in this polluted environment.
Well, the first thing, this is maybe jumping ahead for half a moment, but, you know, they just announced the new head of the Democratic National Committee or whatever it is, DNC. If I were that guy, I would pass an immediate rule that every politician, every pundit, every person has to begin all statements with the simple phrase of, in a world of too much information. Now, this is all my perspective, and I may be completely cuckoo and off my rails or whatever, but this has been the journey of my life. Is I was brought into a world that didn't have too much information. People actually thought they could master fields and topics and things like that, and there was a lot of peace of mind in the 1960s and 70s. It began to unravel in the 80s with the information explosion, and it never went backwards. And today we live in a world of too much information, which means that the communication of today is vastly different from just, you know, a few years ago, if not decades and things like that. Marshall McLuhan was the guy in the 60s who began to warn, we're turning into a media-driven society. We were a newspaper-driven society decades earlier, but by the 60s, television was driving everything. And people can't totally get their brains around visual media. And so he understood at the end of his life in the late 70s, just before he died, one of the last things he talked about was what he called the information maelstrom. And he said, if we don't watch out, we're going to hit the day eventually where the amount of information is equaled by the amount of misinformation. And that's where we've been for the last 5 years, I think. So the warnings were there as it went along, but most people aren't very good yielding to warnings. And where we are now is a few simple questions I think to ask us. First off, are you willing to concede that Trump has won this thing for the past 10 years? He's really dominated the communications game, because in the beginning, all the Democrats could think to do was to ridicule the guy when he came out with his simple little slogan, "Make America Great Again," and his red hat. Go back and look at the articles 2014. Now, for me, I was aware of Marshall McLuhan. I had read Neil Postman's book in the mid-'80s, Amusing Ourselves to Death. I'd read David Halberstam's brilliant book, The Powers That Be, that told about that transition into media-driven society. And almost the subtext of the Neil Postman book was, you'd better watch out if anybody ever emerges into the political system who really has a mastery of media. And the first warning sign was Ronald Reagan. Where did he come from? He came out of the media world. He understood it. He was not an intellectual. He ridiculed intellectuals, ridiculed the cerebral side of things, and he dominated this country for a decade. There was your first big warning sign. And then as soon as Trump began to emerge was right when I was finishing my book, Houston, We Have a Narrative. And I developed these couple of simple metrics, just looking at a few of the narrative indicators, and began to see that Trump was double his values for his metrics over Hillary. And at that point, I started writing editorials and couldn't get them published anywhere because, you just, and that's a whole side topic. But the one guy I did partner with for a little while was James Carville. He understood it. When I sent him, managed to get a friend to get him a letter with these metrics, and saw that, look, the metrics are double for Trump from Hillary and all these other people. And none of it surprised me. The morning after he was elected, I was on my buddy Park Howell's podcast talking, and he said, "You're the one guy I heard for the past year that was warning this guy's going to win this election." And I ended up in a group email with 3 prominent climate scientists, one of whom bet me $100 that there was no way that Trump could win. And I said, I'll take that bet. And sadly, won it. So you got to concede that the guy has known what he's doing. And then the next question is, what is it that he's known? He's known about the power and importance of simplicity in a world of too much information. That's what it comes down to.
Right.
There are books. Richard Lanham's book on the economics of attention lays it out pretty clearly. When you take a system and you shift it to so much information, you're going to shift from substance to style. And people can't process the substance anymore, and they're just looking for elements of style. And that's exactly what Trump has understood. And he's gone with a very simple slogan. And you can go on and on about that slogan, "Make America Great Again." It comes right out. There you go. Yeah, Lanham's book is a brilliant book. Now, you want to know something? I had lunch with the guy just before, because I quoted a bunch in my first book and talked to him about it. And I said, "Why is this not a bestseller?" You want to know what he said? One word. He didn't say the word, but I can tell you the word. The word is silos. He was a literature professor who wrote this brilliant book for communication, but he said he couldn't get anybody in the world, academic world of communications, to review it, to talk about it, blah, 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 blah. You're not part of our club. Welcome to a world of too much information where everybody's so siloed they can't talk across different disciplines. And to this day, look at the subtitle, "Style and Substance in the Age of Information." The subtitle of my first book was "Talking Substance in an Age of Style." That is still the challenge. We're in a world of too much information. And that's what these guys have taken advantage of. They've known it. And look at Bannon. Where did he come from? He went and did a bunch of film stuff. He came out of the media world to some extent.
Right.
You might want to ask the question of exactly who is winning. I mean, Trump's clearly winning. I don't know that Bannon has won. I don't know that he's quite got the complete mastery of it, but he's got his finger on a bunch of these dynamics, and he's absolutely right. He understands this stuff, and it's about the visceral level. And that's what I learned in my journey. Is I've had 2 careers. First one was very cerebral. I was a marine biologist, professor, yada, yada, yada. And then at age 38, got interested in communication and left that career, went to film school. And the first thing I was slapped in the face with is, you are a very cerebral person. Film is a visceral medium.
Right.
Visual media is visceral. And that is the challenge. And once you start to absorb that, then you start to look at this academic world and you see how utterly flummoxed they are by it. They do not at any sort of intuitive level understand how this society works.
Right.
Okay. So then towards that, trying to figure out what can be done about it. As Bannon talks about there, the term that just in the last 2 or 3 weeks has started to be talked about is flooding the zone. Side note, I think it'd be really appropriate if a lot of the Democrats use the term blitzkrieg, because I've been studying a little bit about World War II lately, and the Germans developed it and they tested it out during the Spanish Civil War, blitzkrieg. And they really, I think there's deeper origins to it as well. Maybe some of the Asian arts of war and things like that. But regardless, blitzkrieg is really the right term, because it connects with that whole mindset. And so it is this idea of flooding the zone. And then, the on a separate plane, the term that I've been interested in trying to get promoted more highly is the Gish Gallop from Jeannie Scott. And when I made my movie Flock of Dodos 20 years ago now, I was filming it, Jeannie had just coined this term, the Gish Gallop. And there's a Wikipedia page for it now, so you really can read up on it. It's really nice. And what that was in reference to was the creationist Duane Gish, who had managed to hoodwink evolutionists into getting up on a stage and, quote, debating him. And once they got going, there you go. He would do the Gish Gallop. And you see down there, American creationist Duane Gish. And
I hadn't absorbed that it came from the creationist moment.
Oh, yeah. And it's just a shame. I wish somebody powerful at the New York Times, maybe Ezra Klein or somebody like that, would give a boost to this term. It is important that you get the right terms out there to be talked about. And the right terms are not all this psychology, gobbly-goobly, blabbity-blab of cognitive biases and gaslighting and all of these other terms that come out of the world of psychology that are cerebral. They're not useful. You don't hear the Republicans citing that stuff all the time. They are very practical and pragmatic. And so what's kind of the secret to their success at the moment, and what's the only way to combat it? It all just keeps coming down to this one number, and that one number is 1, because that's what's at the core of narrative, is the singular. Narrative is that it's most powerful when it's at the singular. One of the key principles I learned from the acting classes I took that we use endlessly in our narrative training now is the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. And there's nothing more powerful than the story of the one individual doing these one things. You can see it endlessly in the dynamics of movies and things of that sort. So here's 3 different works that totally understand that. And for anybody who's interested in this stuff, and it's very relevant to what's going on right now. And the first thing to say is that there should not be any expiration date applied to knowledge. And that's the sad thing, I think, that happens a lot with the Democratic Party, is a tendency to say, well, that was, something that's old school. That was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 seconds. Knowledge doesn't have expiration dates. Really smart, important things that get done need to be talked about and kept in the picture. So here's the first one. 2009, Nicholas Kristof, I think 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner for the New York Times, wrote this very simple, brilliant article that we've used endlessly in our training. We keep bringing it back. And it's in, of all crazy places, Outside Magazine. I always tell everybody, all you got to do is search Nicholas Kristof Outside Magazine. It's the first thing that'll pop up. And the title of it is what, Andy?
Nick Kristof's advice for saving the world.
There you go. Can you read the subtitle of it?
What would happen if aid organizations and other philanthropists embraced the dark arts of marketing spin and psychological persuasion used on Madison Avenue? We'd save millions more lives.
Perfect segue to the second book that I want to cite here, which is from the business world. 2012, Gary Keller and Jay Papasan published this book called The One Thing, The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. Now, the most important thing I think about this book is what you're looking at right there, the title. I've never really read that much of it. They all through the book, they capitalize the one thing over and over again. They just beat you over the head with the one thing, which is great. But, you really don't need to go much more than the title. But to their credit, exactly. And what they open it with is a clip that we use all the time in the narrative training, which is a clip from the movie City Slickers from the 1990s. And Billy Crystal and Jack Palance are out riding horses and talking insights into life wisdom. And Jack Palance says to Billy Crystal, the thing you've got to figure out is this. And he holds his finger up, and Billy Crystal says, your finger? And he says, no, it's about the one thing. And then Billy Crystal says, well, what is the one thing? And Jack Palance says, that's what you got to figure out. And that's the little anecdote that they open their book with, the One Thing book, talking about that. And it's more than just cute. It's exactly how it works. It's about the one thing. And it's about finding the singular narrative. This is what we do with the ABT model, the and but therefore model. It all begins by figuring out what is your problem and what's the one main thing that you're really focused on, because people, they can't, God, you see these intellectual discussions sometimes, and one academic or another will finally say, I'd like to think that people can keep two thoughts in their head at once. They can't. They physiologically can't. I mean, they can do a half job of it. It's like multitasking, it's been shown to be that it just doesn't really work. You're just doing a whole bunch of things half baked. Maybe there's a few geniuses who are exceptional and can pull it off, but in general, you really need to get the focus. So that's what it's about. So
just before you go forward, the one thing that's kind of ingenious, I guess is a word you could use, about Trump and Musk right now, is not only is their messaging the one thing, but they're acting across the spectrum of things. So they're messaging one thing, but they're using that framing to go at the U.S. Agency for International Development for basically this whole array of actions. And I don't know if, just stepping back from the overarching points you're making, if there's some bit of advice, like if for someone thinking about U.S. Agency for International Development, which has had problems, what would be the one thing that you would want to convey right now related to having it all be paralyzed and actually physically right now, everyone's being ordered home from Sudan and India and et cetera.
So, again, I'm a simpleton, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But it is as simple as this. You need to they've got the one voice, right. That guy, the head of the party. And by the way, before the pandemic, he had greater than 90% followership among the Republican politicians, levels that have never seen the Democrat. The Democratic Party prides itself traditionally on how scattered it is with its voices. And by the way, it's not about diversity. Diversity is a singular thing. You can have a party that's characterized by diversity. You just got to make it a singular goal. And it's not as simple, and inclusion is not as simple as letting everybody talk all at once. But I think a lot of people don't get it to that sort of depth. There is a long-standing characteristic for the Democratic Party, the famous quote from Will Rogers, "I would never be a member of an organized party. I'm a Democrat." That's important to keep in mind. That was a century ago, basically. I think he said that. So it's a long-term tradition. There's some deeply systemic things that cause it. But that said, it's at crisis levels now where somebody's got to figure this thing out. And so the answer is there's got to be a singular voice to answer this singular voice, from the Republicans. Every time one of these things comes up with USAID or whatever, there needs to be the singular voice that all the media turn to. Just how complicated can this be? How simple can it be? Just pick one damn person and make them in charge. And I don't know that it's going to be this DNC head guy. I saw him a couple of days. I didn't find him all that impressive. The guy I'm impressed with right now is Ezra Levin with his indivisibility thing. Maybe that's the chosen voice that's meant to emerge right now. If that's the case, everybody get together and give the one microphone to the one guy so that we know who to turn to, and give him an advisory team or something that he consults with that helps him come up with the right one thing that he's saying, so he's not spinning out of control as a single individual. But it's just that one spokesperson. 15 years ago, I went to this event in DC that was a big climate thing of 60 great thinkers. And that day, one point, a woman stood up and said, today, inside the Beltway, there are at least 20 different environmental groups communicating about global warming, and every one of them has their own different way, and none of them are collaborating. There you go. Welcome to the left. And it was a good source of humor back when the left was still managing to succeed a little bit. But now it's spun out of control and it's out of whack, and there's nothing humorous about it anymore. And I don't see any other solution until you get that singular voice answering the dominant voice.
And by the way, how much of it is the person and how much of it is a message also?
Oh, who the hell knows? It just begins by the one voice. Until then, so long as you've got, here's a smorgasbord of 18 different people that are going to respond to this thing, you figure out. You're just playing into the world of too much information. I don't know, the one place they kind of figured that over the years is the rebuttal to the State of the Union thing, where they usually have one person, except that they don't, every time they do that, it's a different person. So you just don't know who to turn to. Yeah. And you can't have leadership when it's that confused. That's kind of the bottom line. So those are the first two things. And then the third thing I want to mention here, and then I'm pretty much done. I think I've hit all the main points I want to say for you. But the third thing is, so in 2016, I spent about 3 or 4 months trying to work with James Carville and some of his people, trying to get the Hillary Clinton campaign to listen a little bit to the things I had to say about this narrative model that we've developed now for 15 years, this tripartite model of the ABT, the and, but, therefore structure, which is just continues to solidify. You were there today with our discussion group of 25 people. Yeah. Was that fun?
Yeah. And it's good. You take any question and you work with folks to try to crystallize the way to get efficacy from the verbiage. And everyone seems to realize, oh, we have work to do here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, in terms of where I've been, the last decade, we've been developing this ABT model, and there hasn't been any need to popularize it. We've word of mouth. We're in the 42nd time of running the ABT framework course, usually about 25 to 30 people. And that's just fine. We got a whole lineup of different organizations that are ready to do it next. And beyond that, I have no aspirations to be a millionaire, which, by the way, is easy to do in the world of communication. There are so many charlatans out there that just put out a shingle and claim to be a great communicator and read a few books and yada, yada. And none of that ever interested me, and nor does social media very much. So I kind of, I gave up on Twitter once it changed management. So we just kind of keep doing what we're doing. And it's so fun because we're constantly thinking. And like several of these groups have said to us when we show up to do training work with them, they say, every time you show up here, it's different, but in a good way. We're constantly evolving it. And that's what's going on. And thus that series of books that we've done. And so I did an initial book that was straight out of the course called The Narrative Gym. And once that began feeling pretty good, we began to, I did the first one that was just the whole model in general. And then our business guy, Park Howell, said to me, nice book, but my business people will never use it unless it has business on the cover. So he and I did a second edition of it for business using the ABT model. And each of these volumes, the last chapter, we show 5 different ways to apply the ABT in your field. As soon as we did that, our law guy, Doug Passon, said, we got to do it for law. So we did that. He and I co-authored the law version. And then a fellow that James Carville had introduced me to, his former business partner, Dave Gold, wonderful, wonderful guy, who was just retiring from his whole career as a Democratic Party strategist. And he resonated with the ABT immediately. So we became buddies. We started having long conversations. I had him speak in the course a few times. And then eventually I said, what do you say we write this book together? So that, this isn't on your screen, but this is the one for politics. And notice what's on the cover of this version that we did here. There's a Christmas tree on the cover. Why is there a Christmas tree on the cover of the politics version? Because Dave Gold has this really good, excellent article in Politico from February 2017. And then I might want to call that up. And sadly, it got a little bit of traction, but not much. But let's take a look at that. Can you call up the?
Yeah, hold on. I had it on the screen, but now I gotta.
Yeah.
Here we go. Hold on.
It's such a good article.
Hold on 1 second. Stop screens. I'm yelling at my producer, who's me.
Get in here.
There we go.
Yeah. Scroll that up. Look at the title. Data-driven campaigns are killing the Democratic Party. So this was in the wake of Trump's first victory. Notice it's February 2017. Over 4 straight cycles, Democrats have suffered historic losses. Why? Because they learned all the wrong lessons from Obama's success. And what he's talking about there was that they thought that Obama succeeded because he mastered all the metrics and polling data and the internet and all those sorts of things, all these analytical elements. But really, there was a human element to Obama, and he had a story basically, and he had a good feel, or a pretty good feel for narrative. He had a message, hope and change, at least that still resonates. That's kind of crucial. And then what Dave was pointing out here was the Hillary Clinton campaign never had a message. I mean, that's the sad thing. They never really did. They left nothing behind as a result of it. If the party had run Bernie Sanders that year, he probably would have lost, but there at least would have been a message left behind, which is eat the rich. And he's still,
there you go.
Yes, he's still beating the drum on eat the rich. As much as he's stuck to that one message. This is what it's about. November 2022, Gavin Newsom in an interview, I think with The Hill, he just said they're killing us on narrative. And, there's no better way to say it. They continue. And that's the deal now. And now what you're looking at is the net result of everything that I've tried to warn and make a contribution towards. But what I found early on with the ABT is politicians don't listen. So there's at least a dozen different campaigns that I tried. I had friends, say, hey, this buddy of mine's running for this and that. They really benefit to use the ABT and figure out what their core message is. Tried to work with them. But what you find with politicians is as soon as they run for something, they've already got their best friend from high school who's they know communications, and that person's already been hired as communications director. And then it turns into territoriality. And that's been the mind-bending thing for me in these two careers, because as a scientist, we were trained from day one to collaborate. We're all trying to make the world smarter. And people always set aside egos to, not always, but they try to a lot more in science. There's an ethic there of setting aside your ego to collaborate. I wasn't prepared for what goes on with the communications world, which is being told verbatim. This university is so-and-so's territory. You're not allowed to come here and even practice your wares there. And, I tried to get a bunch of them interested in using the ABT, and then, oh, that's your brand. Well, not really. It's kind of like what the Greeks figured out is their brand and the great philosophers. So as a result, I'm getting older. I'm getting tired of fighting those fights with people that don't listen. So I have this wonderful group of people that do listen. And as a group, we are continue to build this model. And again, that's what you took part in this morning was this. We've started this weekly gathering of about 25 or so people. And it's just an hour of everybody talking ABT. And the cool thing with ABT is that it gets over that silos problem. So when you look at communication, there are two fundamental parts to it. There's content and there's form. And everybody differs in content between different disciplines. So, it's hard to get somebody from the business world to talk to somebody from the political world, to talk to somebody from the science world, talk to somebody from the law world about content, because the information they're dealing with is all completely different. But if they can realize there's this other part called form, and if you realize that the ABT is the ideal form, then suddenly you've got all this common ground. And this is what we find. And that's why when you come to that discussion there, 25 people from all different professions. We had Park there from the business world. We had Doug from the legal world. We had on and on and on. And that makes it really, really fun to be able to cross over different disciplines. We had Patty Limerick there from the world of history, MacArthur Fellow, and all sorts of people. And we had from the world of journalism, my good friend, Andy Revkin.
That guy. I wonder if Heather Cox Richardson seems to have nailed. I'm not sure she's the one voice, but she's certainly found an audience for a progressive view of history and the like, and she has millions of followers on various media now.
It's okay. Hang on 1 second there. That's really one of the major problems we've stumbled into nowadays, is that having millions of followers doesn't necessarily equate into
impact.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate because we've turned into this, everybody's metrics driven. And so now how many followers have you got? And whatever.
Yeah. Boy, oh boy. Well, I put up a link. The abtframework.com link is visible here for those who are watching right now to learn more about your narrative gem and the work you do. Is there any last...
Well, the thing I'll warn you about the website and everything, we're not very marketing oriented. As I said, we have a steady flow of plenty of people to work with. And once you got that, I don't really want to get caught up in trying to bend our thing around to provide a service to people and all the things that go with that. In part because we're still learning and still evolving the model. And we've got our own agenda that we do. But it's really, really fun. And all the groups that we work with, they totally get it.
Good. And I'm throwing up this, I use this complexity monster image a lot. And Godzilla. I gave a talk recently, and, Trump is doing the Godzilla thing right now. And with so much presidential power, there's lots out there about strategies for There's actually a paper out that I'm going to have the authors on as soon as I can on the history of autocracies and U-turns that this kind of governance usually in the history since 1900 it has had these great reversals, that countries that have had an autocrat tend to turn around and become more democratic. Not all.
Well, you know what? But I would contrast that with, I wish I would have saved it somewhere around January or February of 2017, right after Trump got elected. There was a really good editorial in the New York Times. And it was about similarly, when you look at the history of nations, virtually no nation has ever solved the problem of wealth inequality with anything other than violence. And rich people don't hand back the money. They don't hand back the power. It goes one direction. And I worry, whoever wrote that thing ought to do an updated version for right now, because it's the same time, basically. In fact, I wonder who wrote that. Yeah. It was January, February of 2017 in the New York Times. And it was just chilling. I remember reading that and thinking, really? And that's what they pretty confidently said. Wow. These things don't get resolved through negotiations. People grab onto money and power. They don't give it. And that's what we're seeing. It's really sad. Who was that the other day? Bill Maher had Jesse Eisenberg on his show, the actor. Mm-hmm. And he played Mark Zuckerberg, remember, in the social network. And at the end of his whole discussion, he was saying, I just wish that these super wealthy guys like Zuckerberg and Bezos and Elon Musk were giving their money to good causes, but there's no sign they're doing much of that at all. I mean, maybe they do enough to justify it or whatever, but it's not a major line that gets led with, like, look at how generous they are and how concerned they are about improving, the standard of living or whatever. It falls right in with that editorial. Once these people get this stuff, this money and the power, they're not giving it back.
Yeah, I just did a conversation 2 days ago with someone working to get philanthropists, rich people, to how they can get more out of their money with sustainability issues in mind. But I did bring up this question about, well, a lot of the rich people who are in power don't seem interested in that. Are you doing any marketing to them? And I think you're right. This piece is not the one you were talking about, by the way. This is a Dilemma for Humanity: Stark Inequality or War. And it was Eduardo Porter, who's a great writer.
Wait, that's maybe the article?
It's December 2016.
Well, no, I was saying January 2017. So I think that's probably is the article.
It's pretty stark.
Yeah. If that comes to the same conclusion, that probably is the article. Yeah, exactly. They don't give it back. Right. Yes. Inequality or total war. There you go. That is pretty stark. That is the article. Definitely. Thank you for tracking that down. Well, Jesus.
Yeah, I know. Jesus.
Yeah. What are we headed towards? Who's in charge? Where's the voice on the left? I think there's some decent folks, but I don't know. I just, I'd follow this indivisibility thing a little bit. And then Ezra Klein was on Rachel Maddow last night and listening to him, like, wow, that he's got it figured out, at least this idea of pick the one voice and get everybody together. There's power in unity. United we stand, divided we fall.
There you go. Well, hey, Randy, it's always good to check in with you from the scorched hills of Malibu, California. And I've done several pieces and broadcasts about the horrific impact of the recent fires in LA.
Oh yeah.
And we talked years ago about the ones that devastated Malibu.
The one that I donated my house to.
Yeah, more to come. Thanks always for your insights and provocations, and people who tuned in for this unplanned sustain unplanned sustain show.
I think it was 15 minutes before we started. You said, hey, you want to do something? Okay, why not?
Share the link you're watching on with others, and I'll post this tonight on my Substack thingy called Sustain What as well. And we should just check in periodically.
Yes,
there are a lot of people watching, so that's good to know, but I think we should cut it short.
Well, I don't know that I have much wisdom, but all those books that I cited are all there's where there should not be an expiration date on knowledge. That's my number one thing. Just because something, I don't know why Nicholas Kristof doesn't promote that article from 2009 from Outside Magazine. That is such a good article. And it's the ratio of knowledge to total words is just, I don't know anything else I've ever read on communication with that ratio.
Actually, maybe I need to do a new version. I should do an information one. Let me just show one more thing here before we close out, especially also because there are people watching. And I've done one of the forms of knowledge that we completely zone out on over and over and over again is on disaster risk. Like, it's not a surprise. These things that have happened in recent weeks and years are not new. And I'm trying to share my screen in a different way. Come on, Andrew. Share screen window. Why is it not?
Well, now that you brought up that topic, can I be granted another 40 seconds before?
Yes, you can. Oh, here we go. So I've done charts like this for flood, drought, earthquake, and they show that we know that even the area of North Carolina that was devastated by those floods, everyone's go, oh my God, global warming, when they should be looking back to 1791 and 1916, and we forget. So maybe I need to do a mind the gap card for knowledge about communication and knowledge about risk. I think
Okay, let me say my 40 seconds on risk.
Yep.
The term that I coined in my Houston We Have a Narrative book in 2015 is narrative intuition. I derived that from the term story sense for Hollywood screenwriters. And they talk about, there are these basic formulae to learn for the structure, but you need to learn those, get beyond it to the point where you've got intuition, you feel it. You can read a story and you could tell, there's not enough contradiction in here. There's not enough agreement. There's not enough setup. You want to get to the point where you've got it at a visceral level. You can sense it. So that is the term narrative intuition. And as I said, at the core of it is the one. Well, the opposite term to that is numerical intuition. And this is what academics and particularly scientists have, much better than the rest of society. Scientists have the ability to go to the ocean and not worry about shark attack at all because they have numerical intuition. They know what the stats are. There's much higher chance of getting killed in the car on the way to the beach than there is of getting eaten by a shark. But the general public doesn't have that. They're driven by narrative intuition. They saw Jaws and they don't care about your stupid numbers. And the same thing with the vaccines and all of this stuff. There's your fundamental divide. Narrative intuition, the general public, and numerical intuition, these brains that are highly trained with quantitative approaches, and they can grasp the statistics and realize you don't need to be afraid of a shark attack. But until the two sides understand each other and respect that, it doesn't work to just sit there and call the public stupid because they're afraid of shark attacks.
Absolutely.
God, all my friends out here, I try and get them to go surfing with me, and I'm not getting that water. The shark's going to eat me up. There's no point trying to argue numbers with them. It's crazy.
I would kind of be in that boat or in that on that board.
There you go. And you still believe in Santa Claus. Right?
No, I know. But this is, and there you are with your surfboard. I don't see any tooth marks on it either.
No, not that one. Right.
All right. That's also very, we should do a whole nother episode on that idea of these two forms of
the fundamental divide. The more I've worked on this, it's how it's really hit me is numerical versus narrative intuition. That's your fundamental divide. And if only we could get the people in charge of public health to think in those terms. That's what I'm slowly working on. We're working a lot with public and global health groups, which is really, really fun. There you go. Narrative intuition.
Yeah. So that's there's the phrase of one of the phrases of the day. And,
Here's to it. Yeah.
And you know who has narrative intuition?
Who dat?
The most powerful man on the planet right now.
You better believe it. Last point to make on that. He is not a good storyteller. People need to think that through. He could not give a damn about storytelling. He has no humanity side to him, but he knows narrative structure, which is basically setup, problem, solution. And he comes into a room and that's all he wants to talk about. What's the problem here? How are we going to solve it? And he doesn't care about the setup and what things mean. This is what's going on right now with how in the world can you think that the Palestinians want to give up their homeland? What's missing in a brain that doesn't grasp that fundamental part of the setup? And that's what he's so driven on problem solution that to him, I think it makes total sense. Oh, well, yes, that's just sentimentality. The idea that you're connected to your homeland, and they'll get over that, move them somewhere. Right. Yeah. It's right. Gee, minis. Yeah. No, that's really fundamental because there's been a bunch of people who've written articles about Trump really understands storytelling. No, he doesn't. He's not a storyteller. Reagan did. Reagan was a storyteller. He understood that folksy humanities type of thing to weave in there, but you won't see any of that from Trump. Yeah, but he does get narrative structure. And so it's very important to see the distinction between those two things.
Yeah.
Narrative structure, which is at the core of storytelling, but storytelling is so much more.
Right.
And yeah.
That's really super important. And hopefully people will grasp onto some of these key ideas. Thanks again, Randy Olson.
All right. Always good to talk to Andy Revkin.
Well, we have to stay sane, and having conversation amid all the complexity is
very true.
Process.
Very, very true. Now, I will add to that. One of the fundamental rules in our narrative training is the verbal channel is so powerful. And, you want to really understand the world, you've got to talk a lot about it. You've got to try and explain things to friends, not get too long and too long-winded and boring, but sitting there quietly and just thinking you work it all on your brain, you don't. There's got to be a social dynamic.
Absolutely. And there's still a decent number of people watching, but hey folks, if you're watching, look at the little scrolling bar at the bottom, get in touch with me, and we can get at this more. Oh, someone here, Steve Hayward says,
"Oh,
hey,
wow.
Olson, long time no talk."
Steve Hayward, the man with the stepladder.
Was he in
He was in Sizzle. Yeah, no, we got that clip in there. That's wonderful. Shima, can he talk to us?
No, I'd have to get him the link to get into the
studio. Dang, that's too bad. But hey, Steve Hayward, how you doing? I still love that movie Sizzle. I mean, that's a whole separate, that's what we should maybe do a little discussion on, is revisiting Sizzle, because it is 18 years since I filmed that. And there's so much in there from the climate skeptics that were so right about the things they said. There's Pat Michaels in there saying, they keep saying we've only got 10 years to act. That was 2007. And he said, they've been saying that for at least 2 years. Why don't they subtract 2 and say we've only got 8 years to act? It's only 2 or 3 years ago at one of those cop things, somebody came out with the headline, we've only got 10 years to act. It's so true. Oh man, there's so much in there. And I'm still in touch a lot with Mark Morano, and he and I trade emails and kind of have some laughs off the side. And of course, he's on Fox News every couple of weeks now, but no environmentalist would ever talk to him. That he's taboo. You're not allowed to talk to people on the other side like that. So that's funny.
Yeah, I saw Steve at one of the Breakthrough Institute things this past some months ago. Yes, I'm fine. I'm looking at the trailer for Sizzle.
It was a crazy film, but it the issue has not gone away. Nothing's outdated about it. It's still
there you go. Flash from the past.
This is the best scene in the whole movie right there. We're really, really worried about global warming. We just don't know why we're so worried about it.
Interrupt. Yes, well, we should do a revisitation of it. Maybe with some of the people.
You were on the panel discussion at the premiere at the Woods Hole Film Festival, the East Coast premiere. Yeah, let's do that one of these days, and we can make it. We never did release the film. But we could post it on some site or something. People could watch.
That's wild.
Crazy film.
All right, Randy, it's great to catch up with you. And
all right, that's great. Keep in touch. Well. Bye-bye.
Bye. This is Andy Revkin. This is a pop-up Sustain What webcast. You can look at the scrolling thing at the bottom. This gets archived immediately. Share the link you've been watching on. I'll post it on revkin.substack.com over at Substack. And wherever you are, take a breath, stay sane, find your narrative, and examine your narrative as well. As Randy says, you have to get beyond your own thinking to think about what other people are thinking and how they will embrace or misunderstand your insights, depending on how you frame what you're talking about. So that's it for today. Take care. Bye.